All right. Well, I got a great guest today here on the Men of Forge podcast, Anton Gunn. It's great to have you in.
Happy to be with you, man.
Yeah, Anton, we were just talking about Anton. You were a former South Carolina football player back in the 90s, the good old days.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good today. It was a bad rivalry weekend. Seeing my Gamecocks play the Clemson Tigers and not being able to score a point. I think we crossed the 50 one time. Actually, twice we crossed the 50, and it was pretty embarrassing. But I have to remind myself that 2 years ago, Clemson was whooping Alabama in a national championship game. And so they didn't fall off too much. We got a first-year head coach. Otherwise, I'm good. I had a great Thanksgiving. Got a chance to spend time with family and friends. And so that's what it was about for me. How about you?
It was good. I mean, I didn't, at least your team didn't give you hope. My team gave me hope all the way to the very end. So it is what it is. The Clemsons and the Alabama, the rich get richer,
Yeah, we're scratching for airspace, man. We just trying to get our place in the conference, man, and we're trying hard.
But at least we're not spoiled, right?
Correct. Yeah, we don't have the abundance of riches that other programs have. But I tell you, at least Auburn's been to the mountaintop one time before. As a matter of fact, the one time that my Gamecocks did make it to the SEC championship game, it was against Cam Newton and the Auburn Tigers, and y'all wiped the floor with us that year in 2010. So,
that was a fun game. I was there for that. So, well, cool, Anton. Yeah, usually, speaking of back in your college days, I'd love to hear more of just who were your early influences, who kind of shaped your thinking, good and bad, that led you to who you are today.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's very complicated question for me because I will say that I had a myriad of influences that kind of shaped me in my teen years, and some of that changed dramatically in my 20s, and so I'll start from the very beginning. So I grew up in a military family, so I'm a fourth generation military brat. Great grandfather served in both World Wars. Grandfather World War II. Dad served in Vietnam and Desert Storm. But all my uncles also served. So I have an uncle who's a Korea War veteran as a Marine, an uncle who's a Vietnam veteran in the Army, and then my dad's baby brother was also in the Army for about 6 years at the end of the Vietnam War. So I grew up around lots of military. I grew up in Hampton Roads, Virginia. A lot of people know it as Hampton Roads, but Norfolk, Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Virginia Beach was home. So, you can't get away from the military influence over your life. Just kind of how I see the world has always been through the lens of, big U.S. Navy ships, carriers, and other things. And my father retiring as a chief petty officer. But I will say the strongest influence in my life in my early years was hip hop music artists. And when I say hip hop music artists, I am a classic hip hop guy. I mean, hip hop started in 1973. That was the year that I was born. So as the music and the culture came of age, I came of age. And so when I name names like KRS-One and Chuck D from Public Enemy, those guys were the most influential to me. I mean, every word that they said determined which books I read, which stores I shopped at, what clothes I wanted, how I saw the entire world. And the most important influence, or should I say, the biggest influence was Public Enemy in every aspect of my life. And when I say the biggest influence, I mean, literally, it's the lens how I saw the world and how I felt like I was a human being or that I was a person is by, listening to Public Enemy's music. And so that kind of carried me all the way through college. I mean, I was a rebel without a pause. It taken nations of millions to hold me back. And I got to college to play football. And I had a fortune, a reversal of fortune, if you will. which is I went from a lot of positive influences like being the military and my grandfather and the Navy and everything else and hip hop music and culture to playing college football for some of the most toxic coaches I've ever seen in my life or ever experienced in my life. The way I was treated by my position coach and our head coach and our assistant coaches just kind of, depressed me. It really put me in a bad space mentally and emotionally. And I wanted to quit football, but I didn't want to give up my scholarship. So I became what you would call an 859er. At least that's what I call it, as an 859er. I'm the guy that showed up to work at 8:59 every day, did the bare minimum while I was at work all day just so I could keep my job. And then at 4:59, I was clocking out and going home and wasn't thinking twice about anybody else. So I wasn't the go hard teammate. I wasn't a teammate who would put in extra work or extra hours or work hard to make the team be successful, because I was so bitter and angry at how disrespectful I had been treated by my coaches and how they really didn't care about me, that I would say, I'm just going to do the bare minimum to keep my scholarship. And I kind of existed like that for like my first 2 years of college until I met somebody. And the person I met was a guy named David Coriel. He was actually my academic advisor at the University of South Carolina. And one day he pulled me to the side and he says, Anton, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. He says, Anton, I want you to know that you're a leader. And that was the first time somebody had told me that I was a leader. And I was like, well, what do you mean a leader? He says, you kind of remind me of a former football player that I used to be an advisor for when I was at the University of Virginia. He was at the University of Virginia before coming to the University of South Carolina. And he says, you ever heard of the name Yusuf Jackson? I was like, no, I don't know who Yusuf Jackson is. He said, well, that's Jesse Jackson's son. And he's a former football player at the University of Virginia. He was an All-American, but he was more involved on campus off the field than he was on the field. And he was really seen by all of the students as a leader. And they actually thought that he was going to be the student body president at the University of Virginia. And he says, Anton, you remind me a lot of Yusuf. I see you as a leader. So don't let football define who you are. Know that you're more than a football player. And those words breathed life into a person who wanted to give up on himself, wanted to give up on everything. And it's from that point forward as I made a decision that I was going to be a leader off the field. Yes. So I joined a fraternity and I became the fraternity's president. I later formed a student athlete advisory committee to fight for, welfare of student athletes and improving policies that govern all student athletes. I was the first representative from the University of South Carolina at the SEC annual meeting of student athletes. Wow. I served on an advisory committee for the SEC. I got recommended to be on an NCAA recruiting committee. And then I got involved in student government, helping one of my fraternity brothers run for student body treasurer and then thus getting elected. So kind of my career was shaped by David Coriel telling me that I can be more than just a football player. And literally that has kind of governed the rest of my life, if you will.
Yeah. That's fascinating because it's like, how did he expect you to be that involved, that active? I mean, did you know that you had that personality to be that type of leader?
So I would say I have a kind of I don't want to say it's an addictive personality, but once I get my mind focused on something, there is very little that will deter me from achieving it. Right. So like if you're in the right, I always say this, and this is something that I fundamentally believe, that your mindset is more important than your skill set. That we all know people who are incredibly talented, right? You might be a talented pianist or a talented football player, or maybe you're a talented artist of some sort. But if you don't have the right mindset about your talent, you're never going to achieve the highest levels. Matter of fact, you probably won't outperform people who have a better mindset but have marginal talent. When I played football, there were guys who, had the highest vertical leap. They could run a 40 and 4.3. They could bench press 225 ungodly amounts of time. But if they had the wrong mindset about football, they were never going to be as good as that walk-on who worked hard every day and had to earn their keep. And
Right.
so for me, when it came to leadership, the switch was, he believed in me. He kind of gave me some confidence that I could do something. And I developed this insatiable appetite to learn what it took to become a leader and how I could assert myself. And he guided me along the way, giving me ideas, but make no mistake about it, I did the work, and I just found how rewarding it was to serve other people, that it wasn't about me, but it was about making a difference for other people. And that's how I've kind of lived my life going forward.
Yeah. And so how would you define that mindset as a leader? What would you, for those listening, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so another great question. I define it as really four values. And when I say four values, these are the personal values that I live by. And your mindset has to be focused on all four of these things if you want to be an impactful leader that makes a difference that outlasts your life. And that's how I position myself. So the first value is service, that you have to be willing to serve first before you try to lead people, is to make a difference in people's lives, become a servant. I mean, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says, anybody can be great because everyone can serve. And that if you make a decision to be of service to people, that is, in my mind, the prerequisite of leadership. The second one is not just service, but it's empowerment. So when I say empowerment, empowerment is the essence of leadership. How are you as a leader equipping people with the tools, with the information and the resources so they can be successful in their own lives? What David Coriel did for me is that he gave me some tools. He gave me some books to read. He gave me a framework to form the organization. He gave me information on other leaders who were being successful, and I learned what they did well, and I tried to duplicate that. And then wherever I needed resources, he supported me with those resources. So to be a great leader, you have to equip people and empower them with resources. So the word in my mind is empowerment, okay? The third value, this is one that's really important to me, is justice. So when I say justice, here's what I want you to understand. It's never a wrong time to do the right thing as a leader. And your job as a leader should be to do the right thing for people. Your job should be focused on making things right when you see things that are wrong. Like you don't walk by and see a problem and just let the problem stay there. You do something to make it right. You may not be able to do everything, but it's that effort of trying to do something to make it right will always make you stand out. I mean, just think about any of the superhero movies. I'm a huge Marvel comics fan. So Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk are my two favorite. Of course, Black Panther is also a favorite. And these leaders were required to use their power to do something to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility. So for me, a leader's responsibility is to make things right. And that's living with a framework of justice, that your job is to make those things that are unfair a little bit more fair. That's the third one.
Yeah.
And the last one is the most important one. And when I say the most important one, it's the one that will matter beyond you. And the word is legacy. What is your legacy as a leader? And I like to sum it up with a quote from one of my favorite writers and authors and speakers, is Dr. Miles Monroe. And his quote is, "Success without a successor is a failure." And that if you don't use your gifts, your talents, your knowledge, and your experiences to leave the world a better place for those that come along after you, if you don't use them in that way, you might be successful as a leader, but you will never be significant.
Yeah.
And the leaders that we remember throughout history are the ones that were significant in the lives of others. Not successful, but significant. So those are my criteria and characteristics for being a great leader, is to serve, to empower, to make things right, and to focus on your legacy.
Yeah, that's good. So when you left college and you felt this call to leadership, this desire to serve and equip others and empower them, like you said,
Yeah.
what led to next? What then started shaping this leadership model, these values?
Yeah. So great question. I'll tell you, before I got to that point, I was pretty depressed after college. So just a long story short, football was still toxic for me. I poured myself into the off the field stuff, which was great, but football was so toxic to me that I did my best to get away from it. And so I got my bachelor's degree in 3.5 years. And so I had a bachelor's degree in history because I thought I wanted to be a school teacher, but I was so, distraught about football that I got the history degree, but I didn't take the education classes. So when I graduated, I had a history degree, but I couldn't teach school because I didn't have any of the education certification. So for 18 months after college, I bounced around and didn't have a job. I mean, I did everything from telemarketing to, I didn't wait tables, but I worked in a stock room of a restaurant. I worked in a stock room of another chemical company, just moving barrels around. I was like literally like feeling like I wasted my life going to college because I had a degree. I didn't have a job. But it was because I served in college that I got an amazing opportunity. And when I served, my fraternity, I was a leader in my fraternity, and the advisor of my fraternity called me one day and says, Anton, I need you to send me your resume. And I was like, what's up? He says, I think I found an opportunity that I think you would be perfect at because it fits in line with your values. And he connected me with a small nonprofit called South Carolina Fair Share. And for those, you won't find it today. It doesn't exist anymore. They've kind of gone out of business. But it was a nonprofit that did community-based advocacy work on behalf of underserved communities. So they worked on behalf of poor people, immigrants, people who didn't have health insurance coverage, people who were locked out, priced out, and shut out from opportunities. I mean, we know the kind of world that we're in now. There are a lot of people who are struggling today. Well, Fair Share has been working with those communities since 1986, and they hired me as a community organizer. That literally was my job, and that was to go door to door in underserved communities, talk to people about the problems that they were having, and my job was to help them to find solutions. So I began to understand that my day-to-day job was to serve people who didn't have information and resources and tools, and connect them with services or connect them with other things, but more importantly, to advocate and fight for policy changes that would give them a better life, a better opportunity at life. And so for the next 10 years, I kind of worked in the nonprofit sector. So I went from being an organizer to a policy advocate to working with kids in communities, helping them to graduate from high school and help them to get into college. I did a few other things around child welfare. So I worked at a group home, helping kids who didn't have, parents that they could call their own. They were living in a group home setting. So I did all kinds of stuff in the nonprofit sector, and it really gave me like a humble spirit to know that, we all, have different challenges that we face every day, and we all need somebody to help us to overcome them. And that's where my justice lens kind of grew larger than life. And then I became the executive director or CEO of a nonprofit. And so for 7 years, I kind of led this organization, developing staff, training staff, doing trainings all across the state of South Carolina, helping other people to be better. I've trained nonprofit boards and nonprofit CEOs. So I kind of got into, equipping leaders and helping leaders to be better to run their own organizations. And that was a decade after college.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah. So you're in the nonprofit world, and you're working with leaders. It's interesting just having your military background, and with your dad, your uncles, all your family being in the military, and then now you're in the nonprofit sector and helping leaders. Yeah. So tell me, how, what was something that you took from, maybe from them that you were like, ooh, you can apply to some of what you were doing right after college?
Yeah. So I would say, there was so much. Like, my dad served 22 years in the United States Navy.
Mhm.
And there's one thing that I can tell you, and if you got any of your audience members who are former military, they do an incredible amount of complex work when they're serving in the military. And they have weird titles for everything.
Mhm.
They have environments that are uncharacteristically different than the civilian world. And so there's a lot of complex leadership acumen that you have to have in the military. But when you get out of the military,
Mhm.
there's nobody there to teach you how to translate all of the things that you did in
Mm.
the military
Yeah.
that apply to civilian life.
Mm.
So my father was in supply. So he basically ran supply chain logistics in the United States Navy, and he did it on an aircraft carrier with 3,000 people. It's like running supply chain for a city or a town of 3,000 people. Just very, very complex, right? But when my dad got out of the military, the only thing that he could articulate to people was that he ran the ship's store. And because of that, the first job that he got was working at a 7-Eleven gas station behind the register. And it really was a hard thing for my dad to go to this leadership level in the United States Navy to working at a 7-Eleven from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next day. And then, he left that job and he became a security guard. And so what I learned from watching my father's challenge with the military is that you can have incredible capabilities, again, incredible skill sets, but how are you positioning your mindset to translate those skill sets into other venues and other realms? And so what I did in the nonprofit sector is to help people who had these incredibly diverse backgrounds hone their skills as leaders in the nonprofit sector, to teach them how to have voice, how to use their voice, and how to talk about what they know in ways that people can see the relevance to what they do. So that's kind of what I kind of took from the military. But in my nonprofit sector days, what I took away to my next level, which was in public service and in politics to some degree, is that leaders, your most effective leaders are the ones who are experts at people. Like,
Uh,
you might have an expertise in, let's say, engineering. You might be an engineer, which is phenomenal, right? Went to school for, you got great expertise. But if you get promoted from being engineer to being director of the engineering division,
mhm.
your knowledge about engineering is not at all relevant to what your role is. See,
Mhm.
when you become director, your job is to lead people, direct the team. So your engineering knowledge won't help you manage people more effectively.
Mm.
You got to develop a knowledge base around people. You got to understand human behavior, what inspires people, what motivates people, what pisses them off, what frustrates them. The more you understand how people operate and how they operate together, the more effective you will be as a leader. And that's what you master in the nonprofit sector. Because guess what? You don't have big salaries and bonuses and large paychecks to reward people with in the nonprofit sector. Most people are doing a job because it's their mission, their ministry. They care about it. It's kind of
Mm.
like that at church too. Like, if you're a pastor of a church, you ain't paying people large salaries to volunteer in the parking lot every Saturday or Sunday at service. So you got to find a way to motivate them and inspire them and figure out what's best that to help them to stay engaged. And that's what
Yeah.
I took away from the nonprofit sector, which kind of helped shape my career in politics and public service.
Yeah. So what was the hardest lesson that you learned being in the nonprofit sector?
I would say the hardest lesson I learned is, you know, you got to be effective at asking for money. Nonprofits, by the nature of what they do, they don't generate revenues like a for-profit business does.
Okay.
And much of your money has to come in at the benevolence or the caring of other people. And
Mhm.
so there are millions of nonprofits in the world, And most of them don't have a lot of money because the leaders of those organizations don't know how to ask people for money. And it's an art and a science to asking people to give charitably and liberally to you in order for you to fulfill a mission.
Yeah.
So you got to really understand the art and science in asking for money. And there's nothing more humbling than asking people for large amounts of money that they're not going to get a financial return for. They're going to get some return. They're going to feel good about it, or they're going to see the work get done, or they're going to feel good about the results of the work, but they're not going to get a dividend, a financial dividend, or a shareholder, or a stock payment of any sort. And so the hardest lesson I learned was how to ask for money from people who sometimes really didn't know me, didn't know my organization, didn't know what we're about. So I had to really become a great pitch man and tell a great story about the work that we're doing, why it mattered, and why their dollars would help us to do more of it. So that was super hard.
Yeah, oh, man. Yeah, I know the feeling. Trying to raise support. That you're, like you said, it's a very humbling thing to ask someone for financial. But what then led to you getting into public service and into politics? And was that a hard decision? Was it a person?
Yeah. So here's where I think the story will I won't say go left, but it really is an experience. I was 27 years old. It was a Thursday morning. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I got up and got dressed as I normally do, getting ready to head out the door to go to my graduate. I was in graduate school at the time, going to my internship at a nonprofit. And I heard on the news that a United States ship had an explosion that happened aboard the ship. And when I told you I was 4 generations of military in my family, the 4th generation was my generation, where I didn't serve in the Navy. My brother Sharon joined the United States Navy in January of 2000. And in October of 2000, that explosion was not just an explosion. It was actually a terrorist attack where 2 Al-Qaeda suicide bombers pulled a small boat with 1,000 pounds of C4 explosive, and they blew a 40 by 40-foot hole in the side of a United States Navy destroyer, the USS Cole, that my brother was assigned to. And my 22-year-old brother, who was 5 years younger than me, and 16 of his shipmates were killed in that terrorist attack. And it was the hardest day of my life for my phone to ring that afternoon and to hear my dad crying through the phone that they killed my son. They killed your brother. They killed Sharon. And when it happened, I wanted to give up on life. When I say give up, I mean, I wanted to just drop out of school, move home to Virginia, and just kind of take care of my mom, my dad, and my brothers. I really wanted to give up. And it was hard, man. It was really, really hard. What made it even harder was that because it happened in service in the United States Navy, you expect the military to respond when they get attacked. And most people don't remember, but after the United States was attacked on the USS Cole, we never responded as a nation. As a matter of fact, that was the first time that most people in America heard the name Osama bin Laden. At least that's the first time my family heard Osama bin Laden's name. And when we didn't respond, it was a little bit less than a year later that September 11th happened. And of course, we all know we responded after 9/11. But in the previous 11 months before 9/11, I got very angry and very bitter that I felt like the country that my father served, the military that my grandfather served and my great grandfather served, that they weren't being accountable and responsive to what happened to, U.S. sailors and Americans. And I didn't really blame the military because I know they do their job. They put on a uniform and their job is to do their job. But the leadership above them are the ones who make those kind of decisions. And I felt like, they weren't being responsive to us. I mean, like, I'll be honest with you, for 8 years, the president administration ignored us, ignored our family. That was the Bush administration. And even after the coal attack happened under President Clinton, it happened in October. The November election happened a month later, and Bill Clinton was leaving office, and they kind of like brushed us to the side. And so I felt like two presidents' administrations just kind of ignored what my family was going through. And it inspired me to want to be a leader that would never ignore when people were hurting or never ignore when things were going wrong, to be committed, to be authentic, to be responsible, to be accountable, and to address those things that were wrong. And I thought that losing a brother in a terrorist attack during peacetime was wrong. And I wanted somebody to make it right. And I didn't have any leadership. I didn't see any leadership that was doing that. And that's when I got the wild idea that I should be that kind of leader. Mm. And it was some years later before I actually would run for public office, but that's when I was inspired to do something different. And it was seeing what happened to my family and those other 16 families that says, I want to be the kind of leader that will always make a difference, that won't run in the face of adversity, but will do whatever it takes to make it right. So I ran for the state legislature in 2006, and I lost. I lost by 298 votes out of 14,000. But like every first-time candidate, most people don't realize that most people lose the first time they ever run for office. I mean, it's just this part of the course. Like Ronald Reagan, I think, lost 9 times before he got elected to anything. Yeah. And I think Abraham Lincoln lost like 14 or 15 times before he got elected, right? So, everybody loses, right? Mm-hmm. But because I lost so close, I was inspired to like try to do more. And, that's when I found myself talking my way into Barack Obama's presidential campaign back in 2007. I won't tell you that long story, but your listeners can Google the words Anton Gunn, Time Magazine, Barack Obama, and you read the whole story in Time Magazine. Oh, wow. How I got involved in his campaign. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really got inspired to really feel like I could make a bigger difference. And it led to another 6 or 7 years of public service, where I eventually got elected to the state legislature in 2008. I served 2 years as a state lawmaker in South Carolina. And then I went to go serve in President Obama's administration in 2 different roles, ultimately helping to advise some of the strategy around healthcare and the Affordable Care Act. And I did that until December 31st, 2013, when I got burned out. And that's when I went into business myself and became an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Huh. Got burnt out. Yeah. It's just interesting hearing your story, just for my listeners. I just I'm feeling it's the piece together of growing up in a military family, loving hip hop. Mm-hmm. So that's something about watching the movie about the NWA, mm-hmm. There was something about that music, about recognizing the experience of a people that you didn't understand. Yes. That's what I love. That's what interesting. Yes. That's what I loved about the movie. You're like, yes. Oh, we all miss, especially coming from a white world. We miss oh, that's what their experience was. Yes. I don't know if you're an NWA fan, but
Yes. Oh, no doubt. So listen, man, you're singing off my sheet of music, so to speak. I mean, that was my world. That was my life. The music and the culture, all of those things are what I experienced. And it actually was a narrative of my life. I mean, I literally tell people today, hip hop is who I am. Leadership is what I do. And so, the music informs everything. I mean, I do a 5-mile walk every morning, and I listened to old classic hip hop on my walk every morning. And I was listening to NWA this morning. I was listening to Public Enemy this morning. So, that's just who I am. So it does allow people a lens into someone else's world. And movies can do that too. All aspects of art and entertainment can do that. And that's why I love the arts, because it actually does expose you to things that you normally wouldn't see, would know, and you can get a glimpse into someone's world through the music and through the culture.
Yeah, so cool. So and then the hip hop, the poor leadership in college football world, and and then being the nonprofit and learning from leaders and influencing leaders, and then you have the traumatic event of your brother in the military, and then not being heard, like that part of your family not being heard, and multiple families, it sounds like, not being heard, and then leading that to the wanting to make a difference. And I think what, like you said, you had that moment of wanting to quit.
Yeah.
But then it led to, all right, now it's time to do something. How, just for my listeners, how does someone move, like, not hold on to the victim card the rest of their life, and actually like, it's okay to be angry, like really value your experience, but then moving on from that. And then, all right, now it's time for action.
Yeah. So I would say, I attribute that to, is to recognizing that no matter how bad it is for you, it's worse for somebody else. It really is worse for somebody else. And you may not know who that person is or what they're going through, but my work in the nonprofit sector gave me the opportunity to experience that there are things that are really bad for other people. I mean, like, for instance, I lost my brother in a terrorist attack, and it was devastating. I wouldn't want to wish that pain on anybody else, right? But I got a chance to meet a single mom with 2 kids. One of the kids has severe disabilities. I mean, like, needs around the clock care. And so she never gets a break. She never gets any time off. She's never been on vacation. She's never got a chance to like go to the movies, because just trying to raise that child and trying to give that child a positive life is hard. It's exhausting. And so what I learned is that my responsibility as a leader is to do what I can to help make the world a little bit better for that parent. And so one of the things that I got involved in was a whole campaign to create more of a funding mechanism so that parents like that could get respite care. And that is, have a caregiver come in and take care of her child for a week, so she could actually get a break, so she could actually, just rest and not have to be exhausted by it. So what I found is that, when you're at your darkest hour, when you're in your deepest pain, is what I found to help to make me come out of that was to help other people who are also in their darkest hour, that I could do something to serve someone else, to empower someone else, to make the world a little bit more right for somebody else. And in doing that, I felt better. I felt like I had a purpose. I felt like I was making a difference. I felt like that there was a reason, and my own pain allowed me to just identify with them and know that, we all face some level of adversity. And so I would challenge anybody, is that if you're in that dark place right now, you're feeling like, it's not going to get any better, the first thing that I would say is, don't be afraid to talk to someone about it. I had a counselor and a therapist after my brother was killed, and talking to Mike Williams did wonders for me. And, he probably just only listened to me. He didn't give me like a treatment plan or any of these other things that a lot of people, but I just got a chance to share what I was going through. And in that sharing, I felt a little bit of healing, but I felt the most healing when I started to help other people.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. So so that, going back to your story, you're in politics, and you decided to what you're doing now, which is influencing leaders and creating healthy work culture.
Yeah.
Which is everybody's hearing your story right now. I'm like, oh, that makes complete sense. So yeah, what led to that transition, and
Yeah.
why is that? Why did that put on make now? Why is that now your mission? Why is that what you do now?
Yeah. So great question, man. You're really allowing me to be able to share. So um I worked when I was in the nonprofit sector. A lot of the work that I did had a healthcare connotation to it. So when I mean healthcare, it was always people who had health needs, or whether they be mental health, behavioral health, disabilities and special needs. They didn't access prescription drug coverage, or maybe they just didn't have health insurance at all. So I was always around people in that space. And you would see the hospital in the neighborhood, and it's got the new building, it's got all of the bright lights and everything. And you're like, man, they got so much money at this hospital. Why can't they just take care of all of these needs of the people that I saw?
Yeah.
And so that's when I began to understand how complex the American healthcare system is, and that it's not as easy as everybody would think it is, and that it's a complicated beast. And I'll never forget this one day that I was outside of a hospital, kind of protesting around how they were treating patients who didn't have health insurance coverage. So like, hospitals are supposed to take care of patients who don't have health coverage, but we all know all places aren't treating people equally. I mean, that's just a fact of life, right? So we're out protesting about this. And then some nurses who were going into work said to us, well, if you think they're treating the patients bad, you should see how they treat us. And I was like, what?
Oh,
You got a job in there, so I know you're doing good. You know,
yeah.
and I immediately started to learn that the work environment that people work in healthcare is one of the most toxic work environments in the country, because it's high pressure,
Yeah.
it's high stakes. You can't make a mistake, and if you do, it could cost somebody their lives. And so it literally is an environment where people are getting yelled at and screamed at, and being penalized dramatically for making a mistake. And it's a complex environment. Mistakes are going to happen when you're in a complex environment, but it's really toxic. So here's a couple statistics that maybe your listeners don't know.
Yeah.
Did you know that the suicide rate amongst physicians is 2.5 times higher than the general population? And that there was a survey several years ago that showed that 55% of doctors have thought about leaving the profession in the next 10 years. So you spend your entire life going to medical school and going to residency and everything else to become a doctor. And now you're thinking about leaving a profession. That, the average nurse will burn out after 3 years and want to quit. Now, I'm giving you data that was before we were in a global healthcare pandemic. Now, everybody knows how hard it's been for healthcare workers, through this, COVID-19 pandemic, right? So what bothered me is that the person who is with the greatest responsibility to save lives, to serve and empower you to go back home in good health, is experiencing such a bad scenario at work every day. And I thought that that's wrong for people to be going through that. So my whole goal was to help leaders in healthcare organizations build a world-class culture full of diverse, high-performing teams. And you would know that it's that kind of organization because they have leaders that everybody will admire. Yeah. And so my job is to help you as a leader to understand what it takes to become a great leader every day. And when I say every day, here's how I'll just summarize, and your listeners probably will identify with this. Every employee that shows up to work every day, they're asking 3 questions. And the 3 questions are, do you care about me? Will you help me? And can I trust you?
Yeah.
And so as a leader, you got to ask the question, does your boss answer yes to those 3 questions every day? Not in the words they say to you, but by their actions, do they answer yes to those 3 questions? And if they do, that's a leader that's worthy of admiring. But if they don't, you're going to be ready to quit anytime any one of those questions are not answered. So my football coaches never answered those 3 questions for me.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the healthcare workers who work in environments where they don't have PPE or personal protective equipment, where they don't get enough breaks or shifts off, where they don't have good scheduling, where they get yelled at by patients, they're going to feel like that their leaders, their bosses don't answer yes to those three questions. And so my goal and my mission is to teach them how to answer yes by showing them how to build a better organization through my framework that I call the Justice Code.
The Justice Code, which is mainly leadership focused, or is it a leaders affecting work goal, or both? I mean,
it's both. It's leadership focused. It's teaching you how to lead in an organization, but more importantly, when things go wrong at work, how do you make them right? And that's the fundamental premise, is that when you experience something bad, you want somebody to make it right. I mean, just imagine if you went to a restaurant to eat and your steak came out wrong. Do you expect the wrong steak to just sit on your table and you're expected to eat it? Or are you going to expect the staff to fix it and make it right?
Right.
Whether it's a restaurant, whether it's your car being repaired, or whether it's something going wrong at work, you expect your manager or your leader to do their part to make it right. And I show leaders how they can make it right through a lens that will help them to build a more cohesive culture where everybody strives to make it right at work.
Yeah. And so, man, that's exciting, Anton. Changing the culture and work environment. So give me, where can people find more of this content, more of this information to learn more about what you're doing? Cause that's that's awesome. So.
Well, it's fantastic. So here's what I'm going to do for all of your listeners. I'm going to give you a free PDF worksheet download to help you to become more admired as a leader. So if you go to antongunn.com/admired, give me an email address and I'll send you this PDF worksheet of 7 things you can do to just become a better leader, to become more likable, to share a little bit of your personal story with the people that you work with, to help you to become more admired as a leader. So you can go to antongunn.com/admired and get that worksheet. Or you can just go to antongunn.com and take my free leadership course. I have a 4-part leadership course that teaches people the principles of how to answer those 3 questions and change the culture in your organization. So that's where you can find me, is antongunn.com. And of course, I'm on all social platforms. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the place that I really want to connect with you is on LinkedIn. So add me on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, and drop me a note. I love to connect with you and help you and your organization become a better world-class workplace culture.
That's awesome. Well, Anton, one more question I just thought of. What is the biggest thing you feel that is holding back a leader from creating a healthy, great culture?
I would say the biggest thing is their social blindness around what's actually wrong inside of their organization. So you can't fix what's wrong until you know what's wrong. And what I found more times than not is that more than half of leaders don't even know what's going wrong inside of their organization. They don't know where the culture is bad because people don't talk about it. They see the data points that people are quitting and they're leaving, but they won't ever ask the question why. So they don't know what's wrong. And you can't fix what's wrong till you know what's wrong. And so I help them to get a sense of awareness of how to understand what's wrong in their organization.
Yeah. So putting up the mirror, a lot of leaders struggle with that.
Yes.
It can't be me.
Right.
But as we all know,
everybody else is not me.
Oil
but
drips from the top, right? Yeah.
Right.
So, man, that's great, Anton. So I appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun. Yeah. I could just listen to you for hours, man. This is really powerful stuff. So,
well, it's great to be with you, and thank you for the time, and thank you for what you're doing, and keep helping men to grow and to be forged.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Anton.